The first sign that something was deeply wrong came in a white envelope with my name typed across the front. I opened it at my kitchen table in Columbus, Ohio. Inside was a bill for $190,000. It was for Daniel's wedding, my son's wedding, the one I had not been invited to. My coffee tipped over and ran across the table before I even felt my hand move. I did not curse. I did not call anyone. I just stared at the number, then at the line that listed the financially responsible party. My name. A few minutes later, Daniel called me. "Did you get it?" he asked. I looked at the paper again. "You sent me a bill for a wedding I'm not allowed to attend?" He let out a breath. "Dad, don't make this bigger than it is." That was the moment I knew this was not confusion. Something was wrong. "Tell me honestly, would that have made sense to you?" "I am Robert Miller. I am 72 years old. I spent most of my life as an electrical engineer. After my wife Linda died a few years ago, I lived alone in the house we had shared. Quiet becomes normal after loss. You learn the sound of every room. You also learn when something is off. For most of Daniel's life, I had no reason to doubt him. He was 33 by then. He had always been disciplined. He worked hard. He respected people. Linda used to say he had a steady core. For a long time, I believed that too. Things began to shift after his promotion at work. He seemed proud of it, and I was proud of him. A son should build something for himself. What changed was everything around the promotion. His clothes got sharper. His language got cleaner in a way that felt practiced. He started speaking less about what he enjoyed and more about who he had met, which room he had been in, which dinner mattered. Then he started seeing Emily Carter. The first time I met her, she was polite. She was not rude in any obvious way. She smiled at the right times. She said my house was charming. She asked about my work, but only long enough to move on to her own stories. Her family, their connections, the events they attended, the names that were supposed to mean something. She had a way of making every subject bend back toward status. Daniel watched her when she spoke. Not with love exactly, more with attention. He seemed to be learning from her. I noticed something else too. Whenever family came up, Emily's face changed for a second. She did not ask about Linda. She did not ask how Daniel had been raised. She only asked if I still saw many people, as if she were measuring whether I belonged in whatever world she had in mind. At first, I told myself not to judge her too quickly, but small things began to repeat. Daniel stopped bringing up family around her. When I called, he often stepped outside before speaking freely. If I asked about holiday plans, he answered in broad terms. Once, while Emily was in the room, I said, "Your mother would have wanted to see all this." Emily smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I think Daniel is trying to build something more current now." Daniel said nothing. That sentence stayed with me. More current, as if where he came from had become an old coat to be folded away. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner. Emily chose the restaurant. I could tell before we even sat down. The place was expensive in that careful way that tries not to look expensive. Emily seemed at home there. "We're thinking spring," she said, before menus were even closed. "For the wedding?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "That's the plan." I smiled. "Your mother loved spring weddings." Emily leaned forward. "We're looking at something elegant. Private. Very curated." I glanced at Daniel. "Private from who?" She answered before he could. "Just intimate. The right people." The right people. Over the next month, I learned about the wedding in fragments. Never from Daniel directly. A venue here. A planner there. A photographer someone high profile had recommended. The more money attached itself to the wedding, the less I seemed to exist inside it. One evening I called Daniel and asked a simple question. "When is it?" He paused too long. "We're still finalizing." "With me not invited?" "It's complicated, Dad." "No. It's either yes or no." Another pause. Then he said, "Emily thinks it's better this way." That was the first time he admitted it plainly. I asked him to come by the house the next afternoon. He came alone. He stood in the kitchen where he had once done homework while Linda cooked dinner, and for a moment I thought maybe the room would help him remember himself. It did not. "Emily's family has expectations," he said. I kept my voice calm. "So I embarrass them?" "It's not like that." "Then explain it like it is." He rubbed his forehead. "They want a certain kind of event, and your father does not fit the picture." He looked away. That told me enough. I walked to the counter and lifted the envelope. "Then explain this." His expression changed when he saw the bill. Not surprise. Discomfort. Why is my name on this? He took a breath. The vendors needed someone stable. I laughed once. Stable. You have assets, Dad. Good credit. It was supposed to be temporary. For whom? For the deposits, until everything settled. Did you ask me? He did not answer. My son had let people use my name to hold together a wedding I was not welcome to attend. I pointed to the total. $190,000. For flowers, tables, lighting, food, and whatever else two people think they need to impress strangers. It's not about strangers. It sounds exactly like strangers. He stiffened. You don't understand how these things work. I stepped closer, but I kept my voice low. Then help me understand why my name is attached to it. He had nothing. Not one honest sentence. That evening after he left, I went through every page in that envelope. Contracts, payment schedules, vendor details. My name appeared again and again, either as a guarantor or the contact expected to secure money if Daniel failed. It was neat, professional, quietly outrageous. The paper became a weight in my mind after that. Every time I folded it, the same truth came back. I was useful enough to pay, not worthy enough to attend. I slept little that night. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not pay $1. More than that, I would not let my name remain as some silent support beam under a structure built to push me out. I called Daniel first. I'm not paying that bill, I said. Dad, listen. No, you listen. I want every contract, every deposit, every vendor, and every line connected to my name. That's going to make things worse. They are already worse. Then I called the numbers listed in the packet, one by one. I told them I had not authorized the obligations under my name. I asked for copies of everything tied to it. I asked who had submitted my information. By noon, I understood one thing very clearly. This wedding was larger than a celebration. It was a production, and I was done standing backstage. Would you have trusted him after that? That night, Daniel sent me a single message. You're humiliating me. I read it twice, then I set the phone down. Maybe I was wrong. But what father was supposed to accept that and smile? No, I thought. I was finally looking at the wires. Once I began pulling on those wires, the whole thing started to show itself. The venue had a price that made no sense to me. The food budget was enough to buy a small house in some parts of Ohio. The event planner spoke about positioning, arrival, and guest optics, as if Daniel and Emily were launching a company instead of entering a marriage. This was not being built for a life, it was being built for an audience. I asked Daniel to meet me again. This time I laid the documents across the kitchen table in order. Contracts first, deposits second, the bill last. I wanted him to see the thing as a system, not a dream. I don't have time for another lecture, he said. This is not a lecture. I tapped the stack. It's arithmetic. Emily says you're trying to punish us. Emily says many things. His jaw tightened. She thinks you never gave this a chance. I looked up at him. Did she tell you she put my name on financial documents without my consent? He did not answer that either. So I went line by line. Venue, planner, catering, rentals, lighting, design, photography, private transportation. Every page pushed the wedding further away from reality and closer to theater. At one point I turned a page and saw another number, $75,000, not from a bank, from an arrangement linked to the event planner. High interest, fast approval, immediate deposit support. I slid the page toward him. What is this? He looked down. A bridge loan. No, it is debt. It was temporary. Temporary debt is still debt. He finally sat. That was when I realized he had not fully understood what he had signed. He had memorized the language people used around him. Investment, opportunity, necessary image. He had repeated it so often that it sounded reasonable in his own head. But the numbers did not lie. This loan, I said. What secures it? He rubbed his face. Future bonus, upcoming income, some expected gifts. Expected gifts. I held his gaze. From me? He looked away. I called the planner while Daniel sat there. I put the phone on speaker. We need clarity, I said. A smooth voice answered. Of course, Mr. Miller. These arrangements are common at this level. At what level? A pause. For events with certain social expectations. Daniel stared at the table. I asked, did you advise my son to borrow $75,000 at high interest to meet those expectations? We facilitated a short-term solution. No. You created a trap with polished language. The voice remained calm. Sir, Your son and Miss Carter are eager to establish themselves properly." There it was. Properly. Not happily. Not honestly. Properly. I ended the call. Daniel exhaled hard. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." "You're making me look foolish." I kept my voice steady. "I'm showing you what you signed." That still wasn't the worst part. I still wonder what you would have done. I learned more. Emily's side of the planning was constant pressure. Better venue, better menu, better guest list, better image. Daniel had begun talking about the wedding the way a junior employee talks about pleasing senior management. Nothing was enough, because the purpose was not to celebrate. The purpose was to enter a room and stay there. I met Emily with Daniel present a few days later. I wanted to hear her explain it herself. She arrived dressed as if she were heading somewhere more important afterward. She sat in my living room and crossed one leg over the other. "I know this has become emotional," she said. I said no. "It has become expensive." She gave a small smile. "A wedding reflects values." "Yes, that is exactly what concerns me." Daniel said, "Dad." I raised a hand. "No, I want to hear her." Emily folded her hands. "Daniel has worked very hard to rise. People notice details. They notice presentation. They notice family." There it was again. Family. Used not as love but as display. "And what do they notice about me?" I asked. She met my eyes for the first time. "Robert, this is not personal. It became personal when I was billed for it." She held my gaze. Sometimes older generations don't understand how public perception affects professional life. I let the sentence settle between us. Daniel did not interrupt. He should have. He didn't. "So that is the logic," I said. "I am an old problem in a modern image. You're twisting this." "No. I'm stripping the paint off it." Emily's expression cooled. "Daniel deserves a life that matches his potential." I looked at my son. "And he thinks that life begins by hiding his father?" He said, very quietly, "That's not what I wanted." Emily turned toward him. "Daniel." Just his name. But the tone told me more than a speech would have. It was correction. Control. Reminder. That meeting confirmed what I had suspected. Emily was not trying to build a private bond. She was staging a public elevation. Daniel was useful to that plan because he was capable, ambitious, and eager to prove he belonged somewhere bigger than his own history. After that, I moved from refusal to pressure. I told every vendor tied to my name that I would not guarantee payment. I demanded written confirmation wherever possible. I pressed Daniel to face each total, each deadline, each borrowed dollar. If he wanted to proceed, he had to do it with his own eyes open and his own name carrying the weight. He grew angry. "You're trying to force this to fail," he said one evening over the phone. "I'm forcing you to count. You could just help me." I could. But then you would learn the wrong lesson. What lesson is that? That reality can always be delayed by someone else's sacrifice. He hung up on me. For 2 days he ignored my calls. Then he showed up unannounced. He looked tired. "The venue wants proof of secured funds," he said. I nodded. "The planner says if the next stage doesn't clear, we could lose the date." I nodded again. He looked at me with anger, but now there was fear under it. "Are you happy?" he asked. "No." "Then why are you doing this?" "Because I would rather have you angry at me now than destroyed later." He sat down heavily. "Emily says you want to ruin our future because you don't like her." I opened the folder and turned it toward him again. "This ruin is already on paper." He stared at the numbers. Finally he said, "She keeps saying it will all make sense once the wedding happens." That sentence stayed in the room. Once the wedding happens, as if a ceremony could erase debt, as if applause could become solvency. I asked, "Did she ever say what happens the day after?" He frowned. "What?" "The day after the wedding, when bills remain, when interest grows, when the room is empty." He had no answer. That frightened him more than anything I had said before. Around that time, the venue began pressing harder. Without secured payments, they would not continue holding the date indefinitely. Emily called me once and left a message. "I hope you understand what kind of damage you're causing." Damage. That word mattered, because for the first time, they were speaking as if I were injuring something real. But what was real? A marriage? Or an image package held together by borrowed money and my name? A few days later, Daniel came by again. He looked different, more agitated, less certain of his own lines. "She keeps saying your refusal is humiliating us in front of people," he said. "In front of which people?" He hesitated. "Her family, their circle, the planner, the venue." I leaned back in my chair. Notice who is not on that list. He looked at me. Slowly, he understood. Not once had he named a friend. Not once had he named someone who actually loved him. I asked him one simple question. If this wedding were smaller, honest, and within your means, would she still want it? His face changed. He did not say yes. You tell me, was I supposed to ignore that? The venue finally sent formal notice that without guaranteed funds, the contract would be canceled. The date was at risk. The polished machine began to shudder. Emily was furious. Daniel was panicked. The planner kept talking about solutions. I kept talking about facts. By the end of that week, Daniel stopped defending the dream with the same confidence. He still argued. He still blamed me at times. But cracks had formed. Then he said something I had been waiting to hear. I don't know what's real anymore. I looked at the folder between us. The bill, the contracts, the loan. That, I told him, is where we start. When a person finally admits he does not know what is real, you do not comfort him with slogans. You sit him down with evidence. Daniel came over the next morning carrying his laptop and a folder of account statements. He looked like a man reporting to a job he no longer wanted. I made coffee. We sat at the same kitchen table where the first envelope had landed. We go through everything, I said. He nodded. Everything. For hours we worked in silence, broken by short questions. What is this transfer? I thought that was for design. Then why did it move twice? I don't know. What account is this? Ours. When he said ours, something in his voice tightened. Because until that day, I do not think he had really treated the shared account as a thing that required watching. It had existed in his mind the way trust exists, quietly, safe until proven otherwise. It was not enormous by itself, but it moved from the joint account into a company name connected to Emily. Daniel frowned when he saw it. What is that? You tell me, I said. He clicked through prior statements. There was another one, then another. Money out of the shared account, into her company. No clear explanation. His face changed slowly, then all at once. She never told me about this. I kept my voice flat. How much total? He counted twice before answering. Too much. We kept going. More records. More transactions. Some tied loosely to wedding planning. Some not. Luxury purchases. Jewelry. High-end personal expenses. Charges that had nothing to do with deposits, food, or venue holds. Daniel recognized almost none of them. His hand stayed on the mouse, but he had stopped clicking. I never approved this, he said. No, I replied. You assumed. That was the moment everything turned. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling for several seconds. Then he looked at me with a kind of disbelief that only comes when a person realizes the insult is larger than the money. She made me fight you, he said quietly. I did not answer right away. Once said aloud, it could not be taken back. He stood and walked to the sink. He put both hands on the counter and bowed his head. I need to call her, he said. You need to think first. No, I need to hear what she says. So he called. She answered on speaker because his hands were shaking. Hey, she said lightly. Did you handle the venue issue? He said, what payments went into your company from our account? Silence. Then, what are you talking about? Daniel pulled up the statement. Don't do that. I'm looking at them. Her voice changed, sharper now. Those were reimbursements. For what? For things I handled. What things? A pause. Jewelry. Some wardrobe. Hosting items. Personal presentation. Things connected to the wedding. He stared at the screen. Personal presentation? Daniel, this is exactly what I mean. You don't understand how these events work. I watched his face when she said it, not because the words were new, because they were finally empty enough for him to hear them. You took money without telling me, he said. It was our money. No, you hid it. She exhaled. I moved things around because you were getting emotional. That sentence landed hard. He repeated it slowly. I was getting emotional. Yes, because your father has made this whole process toxic. There it was again, even now. Even with the account open in front of him, she was still turning his eyes back toward me. He ended the call. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, How long have you seen this? Not this exact part, I said, but enough to know the shape of it. He sank back into the chair. I defended her. Yes. I let her make you the problem. Yes. He looked away, ashamed. I did not press him. By midday, we had enough to say the truth plainly. Emily had been moving money out of the joint account into her company. She had used some of it for jewelry and luxury purchases Daniel did not know about. Whatever she called it, it was secrecy. Whatever she claimed, it was manipulation. We then looked at the remaining wedding obligations. Deposits already strained, loans still active, venue unstable, public image still being treated as the emergency. The real emergency had been there all along. Daniel had handed over judgment, money, and dignity piece by piece without noticing where they were going. I asked him, "What do you want to do?" He stared at the statements. "I can't marry her like this." That sentence mattered. It was the first clean one he had spoken in weeks. So he called her again, this time without speaker. I did not hear every word, but I heard enough. "No, listen to me. No, this is not about my father. You hid money." I said no. Then louder, "I'm postponing the wedding." He lowered the phone and sat very still afterward. A postponed wedding sounds temporary. In that room, it felt like an admission that the fantasy had cracked beyond repair. But life rarely breaks in one clean line. It breaks, then keeps testing whether you mean what you said. Emily did not accept the postponement in any honest way. She pushed back immediately, first with charm, then with guilt, then with urgency. According to Daniel, she kept insisting a smaller ceremony could still happen. Something intimate, something controlled, something to protect the narrative. That phrase reached me through Daniel later that evening. "Protect the narrative?" I repeated. He looked embarrassed. "That's what she said. Not protect the relationship." He said nothing. Narrative. Even then, she was speaking as if public appearance mattered more than the wound underneath it. Over the next several days, Daniel and I kept reviewing documents. The bill appeared again and again, along with statements and notices. Paper had become truth in that house. Lies hate records. Emily continued planning around us. That was the chilling part. Even after Daniel confronted her, even after money was exposed, even after venue issues, she kept trying to salvage a ceremony that could be photographed, framed, and explained. Daniel received messages from her at all hours. "We can still do something tasteful. Don't let him destroy this. People are already asking questions. What are you going to tell everyone?" Everyone. People. Narrative. Image. She always returned to the crowd, never to the bond. One evening, Daniel came by looking exhausted. "She says if we delay too long, it becomes a scandal." I looked at him, and what does hidden money become? He let out a bitter laugh, apparently manageable. Still, he was not fully free of it. Part of him still wanted the whole thing to be misunderstood rather than rotten. That is what pride does. It bargains with evidence. So I asked him a question he did not like. If there were no wealthy family, no social circle, no big venue, no polished wedding, would she still be standing here? He took a long time to answer. "I don't know." That answer was more honest than any certainty he had offered before. "Maybe you see it differently." But after that, I could not pretend the problem was only money. Around then, Emily made one more move. She told Daniel she was prepared to go forward with a smaller wedding, but that she wanted less interference. When he pressed her, the meaning became clear enough. She still wanted me out, even after everything, even with the hidden transfers exposed. When Daniel told me that, I felt something settle inside me. Not rage, clarity. I said, "Then this is not about peace. It is about control." He nodded once. He knew it too. By the end of that week, he agreed to meet her in person again to discuss what came next, not to reconcile, to see whether any truth remained. He carried copies of the account records, the transfer trail, and the wedding debt summary. Before he left, I put the papers into a folder and handed it to him. He looked at it, then at me. "You really kept everything?" "Yes." He gave a dry, tired smile. "Good." That was the first moment in a long time that we stood on the same side of a problem. At the door, I said, "If she asks you to choose image over truth, listen carefully. That answer will tell you everything." He left with the folder under his arm, and I had a feeling the next time I saw those papers they would not just expose the lie. They would end it. Was I overreacting, or had it already gone too far to save? The smaller wedding was supposed to solve everything by making the mess look intentional. That was how Daniel described it when he came back from meeting Emily. She had not truly answered the questions about the transfers. She had not shown remorse in any clear way. Instead, she had reframed the whole collapse as a communication problem, then proposed a reduced ceremony to keep things from spiraling publicly. A reduced ceremony, as if betrayal becomes respectable when the flower order is smaller. She says people only need to see that we moved forward, Daniel told me. I looked at him. Moved forward to what? He did not answer. The days that followed were tense and ugly in a quiet way. Emily kept pressing. Daniel kept wavering between anger and exhaustion. He had postponed the larger wedding, but he had not yet broken the final thread. He wanted one last plain answer from her, one last chance for honesty. I understood that, even if I no longer believed he would get it. Then I learned she intended to go ahead with a ceremony plan anyway. Small guest list, private location, controlled setting, and, once again, I was not to be there. That should have ended it on the spot, but manipulation does not work by one blow. It works by tiring people until nonsense sounds easier than confrontation. Daniel called me that morning. She says we can settle everything after, he said. After what? After the ceremony. I felt a cold steadiness come over me. No. She says if I stop this now, the damage will be permanent. It is already permanent. He said nothing. I added, if she can stand beside you and still ask you to postpone truth until after vows, then the vows mean nothing. He whispered. I know. That was when I knew he was close. The ceremony location was not the grand venue from the original plan. That contract was already collapsing under the money issues. This was a smaller place, arranged quickly, meant to preserve the appearance of continuity. Daniel did not ask me to stay away. He also did not quite ask me to come, so I made my own decision. I went. I did not go to create a scene. I went because too much of this story had depended on silence. My silence. Daniel's silence. The silence Emily had counted on. That day, I decided not to give her any more of it. When I arrived, guests were already gathering. Careful clothes, measured smiles, people speaking as if they were all witnessing something refined instead of unstable. Emily was near the front, composed as ever, moving through the space like a hostess defending a brand. Then she saw me. Her expression changed for half a second. Not fear, annoyance. She walked toward me before anyone else could. Robert, she said, low and tight. You were not expected. I kept my voice even. That has been the theme. Her smile returned for the room around us. This really isn't the time. No, I said. The time was weeks ago. This is the result. Daniel came over then. He looked pale. He had not expected me, but he was not surprised. That mattered. Emily turned to him immediately. Why is he here? Daniel looked between us. He's my father. She lowered her voice further. Not today. That sentence told the whole story. I said, you took money from him through lies and still think you choose who belongs? Emily's eyes flashed. That is not what happened. Then explain the transfers. A few nearby guests had gone quiet by then. Emily straightened. I am not doing this here. I replied. You have been doing this here the entire time. Just more carefully. Daniel spoke at last. Emily, answer him. She turned to him, stunned less by the question than by the fact that he asked it in front of other people. We already discussed this, she said. No, he answered. You talked around it. That was the first shift in power anyone else in that room could hear. Emily drew Daniel a step away from me, but not far enough that I could not hear. This is exactly what I warned you about, she said. He answered. You warned me about my father. You never warned me about your own accounts. Her voice sharpened. I moved money because things needed to get done. You bought jewelry. For the wedding. You hid it. For us. He let out a hard breath. No. For you. People were watching openly now. Emily tried another angle. Do you really want to destroy this in front of everyone? Daniel looked around, then back at her. You mean in front of the people you wanted to impress? Her face hardened. You are being manipulated. He gave a short, bitter laugh. By the only person who told me to read the numbers? Emily turned toward me then, no longer bothering with polite tone. You have wanted this from the start. I said, I wanted my son not to be used. Her eyes were cold now. You couldn't stand that he was moving beyond you. I said, you never understood what I was objecting to. She answered, I understood perfectly. You never belonged in this. Several heads turned at that. Daniel stared at her. She seemed to realize, 1 second too late, that she had said the quiet part aloud. But by then it was hanging in the room between all of us. He said very softly, my father never belonged in what? Emily tried to recover. That's not what I meant. Then say what you meant. She stepped closer to him. I meant this life. This level, this world, people judge. And so you hid him. I protected us. He shook his head. No, you protected your image. For the first time, I saw her composure break. Her voice got thinner, faster. We can still do this, she said. We can fix this later. He asked, later than what? Later than today, after the ceremony. There it was again. Get through the image first, truth later. He looked at her for a long time. Then she gave him the sentence that killed it. Daniel, choose. Either we do this without him, or you walk away from me. The room went completely still. I did not speak. I only stood there. Daniel looked at Emily, then at me, then back at her. If that is the choice, he said, then there is no wedding. Her face lost color. Don't be ridiculous. I'm done. Daniel, I said I'm done. She reached for his arm. He stepped back. Everything after that happened quickly and yet felt very slow. Guests pretending not to stare. Silence thick in the room. Emily still trying to push the moment back under control. You are making a mistake, she said. He answered, no, I made the mistake months ago. He turned to me. Let's go. That was it. No shouting, no dramatic speech, just a son finally hearing himself clearly. We walked out together. Outside, the air felt colder than I expected. Daniel stood beside me for several seconds without speaking. Then he said, I should have listened sooner. I looked at him. You listen now. Still, something irreversible had happened. The world Emily kept chasing had demanded he cut away the one person who had refused to flatter it. At the edge of that demand, he finally saw it for what it was. We got into my car and drove away. Halfway down the road, he said, she never wanted a marriage. She wanted a picture. I kept my eyes ahead. Now you know. At a red light, he took out the folder of statements and the old bill. He stared at them, then closed the folder again. That paper had once been a threat. Now it was evidence. Maybe some of you would have stayed quiet to avoid the public damage. I couldn't, and now neither could he. In the days after Daniel walked out of that ceremony, the silence between events finally broke in the right direction. Maybe I was hard on him. Maybe I had to be. But once he chose truth in public, there was no reason to soften what came next. He had debts to face, records to review, and a life to rebuild. At least now he was doing it with his eyes open. Would you have done anything differently? The relationship with Emily did not survive the week. That much was clear almost immediately. Their calls turned from argument to logistics, shared accounts, outstanding obligations, items purchased, money owed. Every practical detail stripped another layer off the illusion. Then Daniel discovered one last thing. He came to my house with the same folder under his arm, but this time he was not confused. He was angry in a cleaner way. She planned to sell the wedding story, he said. I looked at him. To who? A magazine. I let that settle. By then, it fit too neatly with everything else. The social positioning, the secrecy, the need to control who appeared and who disappeared. A wedding had never been enough. It had to become proof, a polished piece of personal branding. Daniel stared at the floor. I don't even know how long she was thinking like that. Long enough, I said. He gave a bitter smile without humor. That's what hurts. It makes every earlier choice look different. Yes, I said. That is what truth does. For a while we sat without speaking. I remembered long ago mornings when Linda would already be up. Sunlight in the window. Daniel younger. The house uncomplicated. I was trying to become someone, Daniel said at last. You already were someone. He looked up, ashamed. I know that now. No, I told him. You know part of it now. The rest is what you do next. That still mattered more than the breakup. A man can escape one bad relationship and still keep the same hunger that put him there. Daniel needed to understand the deeper mistake. He had started measuring success by how it looked from the outside. Once he accepted that scale, everything became negotiable. Money, loyalty, even family. So we got practical. He began organizing the debt. The high-interest loan first, because poison should be handled before pride. Outstanding wedding obligations next. Whatever could be canceled, reduced, or repaid, he addressed directly. No more vague language. No more solutions from people who made money when confusion stayed alive. One afternoon he called one of the remaining service contacts while sitting at my table. I'm not proceeding, he said. Send the final numbers. Pause. No, I'm not discussing future event options. Another pause. Yes, I understand the loss. He ended the call and rubbed his forehead. I asked, "What did they say?" He gave a tired laugh. "That these things happen. Do they?" "Apparently often enough." He looked down at the paper in front of him. "I keep thinking about how easy it was to say yes when it all sounded glamorous." "Glamour is cheap," I said. "Its bills are not." He smiled at that. Small, but real. The months that followed were not dramatic. Real repair rarely looks dramatic. It looks repetitive. Phone calls, payment plans, hard conversations with yourself, quiet weekends, meals without performance, the slow return of proportion. Daniel cut back his spending. He stopped trying to maintain whatever image had wrapped itself around his promotion. He began seeing old friends again, not networking, not strategic contact, friends, men he had drifted from while chasing rooms that required posture. He told me later how strange that felt at first, almost like confessing a fraud he had been living inside. One evening he came by after meeting some of them. "We talked for 3 hours, he said. "About what?" He shrugged. "Real things." I nodded. "That helps." He smiled. "I forgot how much." That was another recovery I had not expected to matter so much. The more Daniel had tried to become impressive, the narrower his life had become. Old friendships reminded him that being known is different from being displayed. Work changed too. Not in one sudden dramatic move, but he began rethinking what he wanted his career to mean. Less performance, more substance. He stopped talking about status and started talking about usefulness again. That sounded more like the son I had raised. One afternoon, while helping me fix a loose light in the hallway, he said, "I used to enjoy solving things." I handed him the screwdriver. "You still do?" He tightened the fitting and looked at the light for a second before switching it back on. "No," he said. "I mean, I used to care whether what I built actually worked." I looked at him. Then care again. Simple words. But they seemed to land. He visited more often after that. Sometimes with a question about finances. Sometimes with nothing urgent at all. We would sit in the kitchen, or on the porch, and talk in a way we had not in a long time. Not because trust had magically returned. Trust is pattern. He was rebuilding it by showing up honestly and staying in difficult conversations without running toward easier lies. One evening he said, "Why didn't you just pay it and be done?" I looked at him across the table. The bill was not there anymore, but I could still see it. "Because then I would have helped you bury yourself." He nodded slowly. "I hated you for a while." "I know. And you still kept helping." "I thought about Linda then." "I was your father before you disappointed me," I said. "I was still your father after." He lowered his eyes for a moment. When he looked up again, they were wet, but he did not look away. "I'm sorry," he said. "There are apologies that come too quickly, meant to close a subject. This was not one of them." "I know," I said. Later that month, he asked if I thought his mother would have been ashamed of him. I said she would have been hurt. He swallowed. "And then," I continued, "she would have wanted you to come back to yourself." He sat very still after that. "I think I'm trying," he said. "You are." From time to time, pieces of the old story still surfaced. A final notice, a remaining balance, some item Emily wanted returned or accounted for. But the emotional center had shifted. The crisis was no longer deciding whether to chase a false life. That decision had been made. The work now was learning how not to hunger for it again. Daniel did that slowly, which is the only way I trust. He paid what he owed. He lived more simply. He stopped arranging his life around other people's approval. He chose distance from Emily entirely, once the last practical ties were addressed. It ended because it had to end. And in that quiet after, I saw something I had not seen in a long time. Peace. Not joy in the loud sense. Not victory. Just peace. The kind that comes when a man stops performing and starts standing still long enough to recognize himself. One Sunday afternoon, he stood in my backyard looking at the house. "I used to think this place was small," he said. I stood beside him. "And now?" He let out a slow breath. "Now I think it was honest." That line stayed with me. Because that was what this whole thing had finally been about. Not money alone. Not one woman alone. It was about whether a man would trade what is honest for what is admired. For a while, Daniel almost did. Then he didn't. We still had scars from it. Months of conflict do not disappear because one decision goes the right way at the end. But something better than comfort had returned between us. Respect rebuilt in plain view. The last time we spoke about Emily in any serious way, Daniel said, "I don't hate her anymore." I asked, "What do you feel?" He thought about it. Clear. That was the right answer. As for me, I went back to my quiet house in Columbus and found it less lonely than before. Not because life had become easier, because truth had finally been allowed in the room. Linda was still gone. Age still brought its own silences. But I no longer felt like I was watching my son vanish into somebody else's script. He had walked out of it. And when he finally chose to live as himself instead of chasing a false image, our family did not become perfect. It became real. That was enough.